Before we officially begin our time together, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge that we are all currently convened on the traditional ancestral homeland of an indigenous tribe. We are currently the uninvited guests who are working, living, and otherwise engaging on the land of the Dakota, Lakota, and Anishinaabe people past and present. I want to ask you in your own life and on your own time to find out whose land you live, work, and otherwise engage on. Gain a better understanding of their issues, right? Learn about these people who are still with us today. Thank you so much. Mychal, thank you for the introduction. Thank you to Optum for sponsoring the culture track. Like, culture has its own track today. And thank you so much for you that are joining us here in the audience and for you all that are joining us virtually. I'm Seena Hodges. Like Mychal said, I use she, her pronouns. I'm the founder and CEO of a company called The Woke Coach. And in addition to running my company, I am the president of the board of trustees for the Walker Art Center. And I am the first person of color to hold that distinction. So let's talk about inclusion and progress and where we are and all the many miles we have to go before we sleep. Today, I am joined by a group of phenomenal panelists that are going to shed light on DEI culture. And it's our hope that we're gonna have a conversation that's really rooted in solutions, and we're gonna tell the truth of our circumstance. So we're not gonna pull any punches today, so we're gonna get into it. On the panel today, we have, right next to me, Amy Root. Amy is the Director of Neurodiversity and Inclusion at Optum United Health Group. Amy is also an advisory board member for Pivot Neurodiversity. And Pivot is a place that empowers companies to support neurodiverse employees in a way that fosters a greater sense of belonging and inclusion for all. Her personal mission is to create comprehensive diversity practices that bring people closer together and effectively cultivate inclusive workplaces. Hi, Amy.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thank you for that introduction. That's great, thank you.
Next to Amy, we have my friend Louie McGee. Louie is a senior at the University of Minnesota, and he's a disability advocate. Louie's also a TEDx speaker, founder of Louie's Vision. He's an accessibility assistant at the Weizmann Art Museum, and Louie has a rare retinal disease that has caused his blindness. Hi, Louie.
Hi, thank you.
Next to Louie is Adam Hjerpe. Adam is the COO of Optum's Growth Office. He's a passionate ambassador and facilitator for our united culture and championing people with disabilities through sponsoring the disability inclusion movement. Adam is also Special Olympics 2026 USA Games board chair.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Hey, go Gophers, Louie.
Go Gophers. And at the end is Mychal Frelix. And Mychal is this co-founder and chief growth officer for TurnSignal. Before joining TurnSignal, Mychal managed enterprise accounts at Sony Electronics, where he helped Fortune 500 companies adopt innovative technology solutions and guided channel partnership relationships. Hi, Mychal.
Hello.
Well, let's give a round of applause for our panel that has taken a lot of time out of their busy schedule to be here today. So before we hop into our conversation, I'd like to just propose two quick things to you. It's what I like to call group agreements, and it usually just kind of sets the parameters for our conversation. So what I'd like to ask you all is that can we just ordain this space a brave space? A lot of times people like to use the language safe space, right? And so what happens in a safe space is the first question that you ask is like, safe for who? That's the first question I ask anyway. And then the other part of it is sometimes people come into a space and they lob all kinds of things in this space and they say, so what is a safe space? We're not doing that today. Today, this is a brave space. And in a brave space, if you make an oops or you cause an ouch, you're accountable for that, right? But we're also not judging folks for what they know, right? So if this is a brave space, it's a space that has accountability, and then we're not judging folks. Is that cool for us? Great. The other thing I just want to ask us is that when we're speaking, to make sure that we're speaking from our own perspectives, and what that looks like is just using I statements, right? And so I know in this work we tell folks not to center yourself, but for a moment I'm going to ask you to center yourself, because if you say I, you're talking about your own lived experience. If you start talking about they and those folks over there, that's slippery by a slope, like you just go down it. So if we can make this a brave space and we can center our own personal experiences, that would be wonderful. Can we do that as a panel today?
Absolutely.
Aye.
Yes.
All right. Well, let's hop right in. And one of the things is this panel is called Designing Your DEI Culture to Attract Top Talent. First question I have is like, what the heck is DEI, right? And so Adam, I just want to talk about terminology. And so if you are asked, how do you define DEI? And also just why is a shared language really important as companies really work to try to attract and retain top talent?
I appreciate the question because I come at it from my perspective on what I think DEI means. And we each do. In fact, we do this as an organization. We come in and have exercises around, let's understand words and terms and definitions, and then say, how do each one of us think about that term? And if you asked each one of us, what does it mean to say diversity, equity, and inclusion? Each of us might come at it very differently. I know I would come at it differently than anybody else, might come at it as to what the definition is, and being able to get the terms and definitions out together and work through those. And I appreciated it because you did something very important today. You labeled the thing, brave space, and then you defined it. And we all understood the definition from each of our own perspectives. And then we all came together and said, I can see and appreciate and understand the definition, agree with it and get on board. Sounds great. So it creates this common place for us to come together. The other important thing I think we've understood is the evolution of terms. We've done this being a sponsor for disability inclusion, being a person that's a parent of a child with a disability. I've got my own experiences, my own perspectives. It makes them mine. It doesn't make them necessarily right or better or wrong or worse or anything. It makes them mine. And when I can bring those to a table and share those with others, we can come to find a place where there's common understanding. And when we get to that common understanding, we can then lock arms and say, let's go on that journey together. And that journey is evolution. I think from a diversity, equity, and inclusion perspective, we've seen this progressive evolution and this experience as we've been broadening our horizons and getting deeper on these terms and understanding internally what does it mean to me, and then how might I share it with others in a brave space. I love that term. We continue to keep moving on that path in a positive way.
Yeah, absolutely. And so why is it important that companies, when they're trying to attract talent, actually say, this is what we mean, and here's the shared language that we're all going to use so that we're singing out the same hymnal, if you will?
For me, it's important. We see this in probably like when you attract customers. People might not necessarily buy what you buy, but they buy why you do it, right? There's the why. I think in attracting talent, people are looking for, I want to find an organization where I can align to their why, their values, their perspectives, their outlook. I want to understand that. I want to understand what they mean when they say those words. I want to understand what they do when they say those words, because I am going to invest a lot of my time and effort, a lot of my discretionary energy and my creativity. I want to make sure I'm going to a place where I can align to it. And if I don't, I want to avoid that place.
There you go, avoidance. I mean, that's honest. Let's be honest, right?
Yeah.
If there's no alignment, why are we doing that? Absolutely. Amy, I want to turn to you. You're like, what? Because your title is Director of Neurodiversity and Inclusion. So it's a title that I'm sure that many people haven't heard before. And I want you to just tell us what this role entails and how you helped your organization discover that you were the perfect person for the role.
Well, that's a great question. So first of all, neurodiversity, I want to do a shared language. It basically means that natural variation in human brains. So all of us are neurodiverse, all of us together. But there are certain groups or people who are neurodistinct or neurodivergent. And you would think of neurotypical are people who are about the majority. Neurotypically functioning brains, but the rest of us, I'm autistic and I have ADHD, so I'm neurodivergent, and other people with dyslexia, dyspraxia. So I came about this, it was many years ago, with a couple of also neurodivergent people in the organization. We started seeing there weren't a lot of neurodivergent people around, or they weren't sharing, they weren't disclosing, and we really wanted to change that. So many years ago, we started doing focused efforts and educating our workforce and trying to get everyone to understand what neurodiversity is and why it's important. And then they finally decided to invest and formalize the role. So that's how I got into the role. And I'm focused on making sure that our workplace is inclusive for all people, but especially neurodivergent individuals. And when we focus on that area, we know that it's good for everyone. So it's like that universal design where we are crafting for all people the greatest amount.
Yeah, a rising tide lifts all boats, right? Louie, hi Louie. So we all talk a great deal about creating inclusive environments where people can be their full selves. That's the goal, right? When we think about inclusion, we want people to be able to be their full selves. So Louie, with your lived experience as a person with a disability, what are some of the mistakes that you've experienced employers make as it relates to creating truly inclusive environments?
Yeah, so for me, growing up, I had a lot of dreams, everybody wants to do something with their life. And then in high school, you may get your first job, likely not going to be your dream job, right? And so I remember my very first job, a lot of things went wrong. I was a dishwasher at a pizza place. And a lot of things that the pizza place there went wrong were, they had never met, no one there had ever met a blind person. We had a meeting when I interviewed, but then nothing beyond that. I can't see how clean things are, so it didn't always go super well. Into college, some other things I noticed were being always the only blind or also just disabled person on a team or in a room or at the company. I was always giving that perspective, which is great, and I'm glad to be giving that. But in experiences I had, and recently I had an internship at a company where there was only one person who wasn't blind, and so just like that experience put into perspective for me all these different things that I took for granted. Like I remember walking into the office and running into a chair, and no one even looked up. And I remember thinking like, wow, that's normal now. And I thought to myself, this is great. At other jobs, that happens plenty where I may, bump into something or I forgot my cane, and then I meet a new person and they don't know, and then there's like an awkward encounter. And so people are, I believe, inherently good-natured, and so people want to help and they want to be inclusive, but sometimes the roadmap for that is tricky, and so, but it's also tricky to be the one person helping them find their roadmap, because I don't have all the answers, so.
Absolutely. We're going to come back to that point about like responsibility and who bears the burden when we're trying to create inclusive environments, so I want to stick a pin in that, but thank you for sharing your perspective, Louie. Mychal, I want to ask you, you're a relatively new founder working at Turn Signal. What are some of the lessons that you learned in your previous career that have informed how you create a culture of inclusion and belonging at your company?
I love this question. And the reason why I love it is I used to dream every day of being the boss, right? Like I wanted to own my own company. And so since I've been working in the tech industry, we hear a lot of common words like hyper-growth and scalability and fast-paced work environments. And a lot of those attributes are the same for startups. But what that fails to do sometimes is a lot of organizations don't necessarily realize that some people are coming to work and they're putting on a veil of armor, and it takes a lot to even walk through that door.
Yeah.
And so what I like to do is say, we want to meet everyone where they are. So when we come to Turn Signal, we like to wear Jordans. We like to come, if you just roll out of bed, put your shoes on, drive in the office or jump on the Zoom. That's completely fine, because we want to meet you where you are. We want to make sure that you're comfortable in creating that culture of belonging. And in the end, I think the results are going to be that for us, we've seen more creativity in the work that they're doing, more productivity, and people really just bought in to our mission, and it's super exciting to be in this position where I can actually build that out for Turn Signal.
You know, it's an interesting notion. It sounds really like far-fetched, but it's true. We're all just the sum of our lived experiences. So if we haven't had an experience, we don't know it, right? And so the more that we can have different experiences, the more that we can interact with people who are not like us, then we get to, to change who we are. We get to have a broader perspective. And so I think that notion of the ability for people to be their full selves is really rooted in how many experiences do we allow people to have that align with who they actually are, right? So one of the things that we want to address as a panel is, let's just talk about what some might perceive as the elephant in the room when you're talking about designing a DEI culture to attract top talent when we're sitting in Minneapolis, Minnesota, right? So the reality of our situation is that we have to talk about recruiting in the age of the racial awakening, right? The murder of George Floyd was really a flashpoint, and it's an important part of our collective history that's going to move forward with us. And so it's an important conversation that we have to have, particularly if you're in the Twin Cities, because it's where it happened. But when you're thinking about recruiting and attracting talent, when the murder happened, folks said a lot of good things about we're going to do this, we're going to change policies, we're going to change practices, we're going to be more inclusive. And so as a result of that and our desire to actually be better people and be more inclusive, what are some of the recruitment activities or initiatives that businesses and organizations, maybe before they wouldn't even think about that, or they might have thought, oh man, this is super radical, we should never even do that. But what are things that now have to be a part of the recruitment process when you're trying to hire folks?
Yeah, I can jump in on this one. Turn Signal. I think some of you know what it is, but Turn Signal is an application that connects people face-to-face with an attorney if they're ever in an accident or being pulled over. And that's important to this question is, how can organizations use unique benefits and unique strategies to recruiting top talent? And so this is not a plug for Turn Signal. I think there's a ton of other organizations out there that are building solutions that are for the needs of this new hybrid society that we live in. We have people going from their offices to meetings and jumping on Zooms and taking meetings in their car, right? It's a whole different work environment that has entirely different needs for people to really feel safe and a sense of belonging. But you also have to share that work that you're doing and share that with your candidates, right? And so a lot of times when I'm having conversations with organizations and saying, hey, Turn Signal might be a great opportunity for you to add an inclusive benefit that's going to help make sure that those people feel safe going from point A to point B. How do we get there? We're going to create this inclusive benefit structure that we haven't necessarily had before. And so whether it's benefits, whether it's just allowing people to take breaks, or whether it's saying, hey, come as you are to the interview, right? It's going to be a common theme for me. There's tons of ways that organizations can start to retool what they've done in the past to build out a really inclusive environment. And so the last piece that I'll say on that is that also means that we as organizations have to look at that entire process from point A to point B, and we have to change what that process is for certain individuals. So I'll leave it at that. Thank you.
Other folks want to weigh in. Go ahead, Louie.
Speaking from the disability community, one thing we are working on at the Wiseman Art Museum, I'm sure most of you are familiar with the ADA, the Americans with Disabilities Act. A lot of times at brick and mortar places or in the workplace, that's where the accommodations end. A lot of times companies, they do what they need to not get sued, and then we're done after that. And so one thing we're working on at the Wiseman is we're trying to go a little above and beyond and see what more we can do, and just inside of our staff find ways so that all different people, the framers, the curators, the student employees that sit at the front desk, how can we all feel incorporated into making it an inclusive space? And so a couple of different ways we've done that are just through trainings. We've had somebody come in from Vision Loss Resources, giving different trainings. We have a training coming up this this November about how to make accessible documents, both internally and externally. You know, how can we kind of go above and beyond and not just hit the bare minimum so we don't get in trouble? Like, how can we actively bring people into our space?
Absolutely, absolutely. Adam or Amy?
I think about this, in thinking about this and listening to Mike and Louie and their comments, I think about a couple of key things about attracting top talent and talking about the situation we're in today and the situation as it is. I think of a couple of key things. Honesty. You got to talk about it. It's important. You can't ignore things. You got to talk about it, and you got to bring it out in the open. The second piece, you got to listen. I bring my perspectives, you bring your perspectives. How do we bring those out there and listen honestly and empathetically to each other? And then it's acts and deeds. Are we really doing these things? We've experienced some things within our own organization. We did something that was completely radical right after George Floyd's murder, is we got together as a team. We weren't sure how we were going to talk about things. We weren't sure what we were going to talk, but we got together and said we need to talk. We need to talk to each other and support each other. Did we know what that meant? Not really. Were we open to what could it be? Absolutely. And we had to go and take those actions and learn our way forward. And what I found from the people that are coming into our organization is appreciating that honesty and then contributing to it. And then taking the act, not just talking about it, taking actions and then being open and vulnerable. We might not have the answers. We might not know the direction, and this curiosity and willingness to go on the journey and find the direction, knowing that sometimes we're not going to get it right. Many times we won't get it right, but we're going to keep going until we get it right, and we need everyone's input to do so.
Yeah. You know what I just heard you say that is resonating with me is the fact that talking can be radical, right? And so I asked the question about like what radical things have you done? So sometimes folks are just not even talking to each other, right? So talking as a radical, just write that down in your notebook. Like talking can be a radical act because it can, right? Because it can lead to change, and we can change our actions based on conversations. And going back to our lived experience, those conversations, they inform your lived experience. That's what happens, right? Yeah. So the other thing, what are you hearing as you're hiring? And I know some of you are hiring folks. And what are you hearing from potential employees about what's non-negotiable? Like, what are the things that people feel like they have to have now that a few years ago you'd be like, we'd never do that?
Flexible location and flexible work schedules has been a really big one that I've heard a lot of.
Yeah, that's been a really big one around meet me where I am and the best way that I can work. And there's people, each one of us can work and get to our full potential different ways. It's being open to that, being curious and being open and thinking maybe we thought about the way people work this way, being open to this and saying, okay, let's try it. If it doesn't work, we'll make an adjustment.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Yeah, I think a lot of potential candidates are actually looking at the organization too and saying, what are you doing as an organization? And so instead of, a lot of times what I'm hearing is like, hey, I love to work for your organization. Tell me about the work that you're doing within the community, right? And what impact that you're making. And so just as much as it's an interview for me to that candidate, they're interviewing me as an organization. And that's a piece where they're really, we always say, they're pulling up. They're pulling up on us and saying, hey, what are you doing?
Yeah, absolutely. Amy, did you want to add something?
I forgot.
Okay.
I forgot it.
No worries, that happens to me all the time. So in any business or organization, we talk about wanting an inclusive and equitable culture. So if you're trying to foster an inclusive environment, whose responsibility is that? Like, who bears the responsibility? And what should folks be thinking about when they're trying to set their strategy for culture inside of their companies and businesses? So one, who's responsible, and who, two?
Everyone. Everyone is responsible for a healthy culture. Everyone is responsible for being open and vulnerable and listening and being accountable and acting.
Yeah.
So, touching back on what I mentioned earlier with as far as responsibility, I think we're right. Everybody is responsible. I think a lot of times it doesn't necessarily pan out that way, and so making sure ahead of time to have the conversations that we want to make sure everyone is feeling responsible and everyone knows where they need to be responsible. I think sometimes it can be incorporated. Like I was mentioning earlier, if I feel like I'm the first blind person to work, at the art museum, I feel like I got to share all my experiences, and then I think to myself, well, I'm not the only blind guy in the world. I have very different vision than other people. Where do we draw the line between feeling responsibility and then sharing the responsibility?
Yeah.
I feel like leadership also has a very key role in this, and where they set expectations and they make sure they share and communicate that shared language, getting everyone on the same page, and then allowing employees and people to kind of come at it in different perspectives, different way, give it a life and breathing life to it.
Yeah.
But really, leadership needs to be setting that tone too.
Yeah. So leadership needs to set the tone. The other thing I want us to think about is this notion of, have you all ever heard the term emotional labor? Folks heard the term emotional labor? Well, it means, sometimes when there's someone who's the most acutely impacted by the scenario, asking that person to solve that for you, right? And so when you have issues in your company that are related to race, asking the people of color to solve those issues for you, right? When you have issues related to disability, asking the folks with disabilities to solve those problems for you. And so I think about when we're thinking about the work, and the work does belong to everyone, but also like if we drill down a little bit, like what's your piece of that work, right? Because I think it's hard sometimes to ask folks to perform additional emotional labor if they are the person that is most acutely impacted by. I think you can ask them to inform you and maybe ask their opinion about how things should go, but I think it can be really challenging to ask folks who are most acutely impacted to solve those problems for companies. I see you looking at me, Mychal. What are you saying to me telepathically right now?
As I think everyone is a perfectly fine answer, but I also think that there should be, we want diversity, but sometimes the organizations aren't diverse, right? And so you're tapping on the, we'll call it the tokens within your organization, but you need to go into the community and figure out what they want and what they need. And so there's lots of opportunities for organizations to not put the burden on those people within the organization to solve the problem.
Yeah.
And also look outwardly to the communities that you want to emulate within your company.
Yeah. I think it's also important, one of the things that I hear in my work a lot from folks who are in charge of ERGs, employee resource groups, they say that they have additional work. And of course they do. They have an additional workload, but there's not any additional compensation for that work. Or people aren't thinking about how it is that they're managing to get all that work done on top of the work that they're doing. Because for a lot of us, and you talked about it earlier, Adam, we're not talking. So for the first time we're talking, and like all this stuff is coming up, and there's a lot of things there are a lot of things that need to be done based on these conversations that we're having. So as we're thinking about attracting and retaining top talent, do think about the notion of emotional labor. Do think about whose responsibility is what. But know that yes, this is a responsibility of everyone to create the environment that we want to have. Now, this is the point in the conversation where I say it feels like there's a lot of work to be done, which is kind of true, right? It's kind of true that there's a lot of work to be done. What do you say to folks who say things like, I have limited time, I have limited resources, I don't know how I'm gonna make this work? What do you say to those folks?
Normally something snarky like, you don't want the best people then, you don't want to be profitable compared to your competitors, you don't want to be the top in the space. I mean, we must have diversity and inclusion to make ourselves the best and to represent the communities that we're serving and to get the best understanding of people that we're trying to serve. We have to do it, and you're going to pay for it one way or another, I would say. You need to do it.
Absolutely.
I think, an experience I had to this effect was this internship I had this past spring. One of the things the company does is it helps. So it helps. The goal of the company is to help blind people get into work in the UK. And one thing that they do is provide a network of mentoring. And so I think that helps because sometimes if a new employee may feel that they don't have enough time or they don't want to be part of a conversation because there's too much on them. Having the mentor and having somebody who maybe has a similar experience, not the same, but similar, they can kind of talk out how they might have done it, have another conversation with a person just kind of, get another perspective and understand how someone else did it, and you might learn something more for yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely.
I think about the things that we build as startups. You're building a solution. Does that solution really meet who you intend to serve? Do you really know what they need? Is it really built like that, or are our products built that are excluding a huge opportunity for our markets? Have we really embraced and listened to the people that it could serve, each person, and what need is not being met? Do the practices, the policies, the products, the services that we have today, are they too narrowly designed and built and delivered? And if we can invite in the people in our communities, the people that could be, and understand their experiences, understand their challenges, we can quickly incorporate that into the products and services that we build, and then it has so much more broader appeal, so much more value to your end consumer and user, and then that just continues to be a virtuous cycle. Think about the products and services that we use that continue to get better because they listen to us. They took our feedback, they valued it, they appreciated it, then they incorporated it. And all of a sudden now, that's a really great product that got even better, and it gets more sticky, and all of the things we want to see as startup leaders and as founders. You want to see people embrace the solution you're offering to the market. If that solution can be broader and better because you continue to take their input, think of the power of that relationship you have with those that you serve.
Absolutely. I saw you nodding like you were going to say something, but I think you're just co-signing.
I'll just say, just get started. That's it. Just get started.
Yeah. I think that, let's name it, the number one thing that keeps people from actually doing the work is fear. And so because you're afraid, you say, if I do this, to your point earlier, Adam, you said, I'm going to make a mistake. And we're all going to make mistakes. And so we can't be dissuaded from doing the work because we're afraid that we're going to make a mistake, because a mistake is inevitable. But to your point, if we don't do any of the work, it's going to cost us one way or the other. So we have to decide who we want to pay, right? Yeah, and inclusion's not free. It costs, absolutely. So when Louie was talking, Louie talked about the notion of mentorship. And one of the things that we were talking about earlier too is this distinction between being a mentor and being a sponsor, And so one of the things that we were talking about backstage, Adam, is the distinction between whether or not, if you're a mentor, you're actually helping someone progress the career on their own terms, or you're just teaching them how to do it the way that you've always done it. When you think about the distinction between a mentor and a sponsor, what do you think about that, Adam?
For me, the distinction, and I hadn't thought about it that way in my career until I had a great colleague. She brought it to us and said, let me tell you what sponsorship means. And the thing that I took most from, we talk about these ideas of definitions, is it was active. And that really hit me because it was, I have to go do something. And I think a mentorship can be passive. Many times it is passive. Come and talk to me, I'll listen, I'll give you feedback. But when you get pulled in the idea of sponsorship is active. All of a sudden now I felt after talking to her, I'm like, I want to be activated. If I'm sitting down with somebody and I'm committing to being their sponsor, I need to be their advocate when they're not in the room, when they're not around, when they're not there. I am their advocate, and I'm bringing up their name and their work and their perspective. And I'm also checking in saying, am I representing it right? Because sometimes I'm in a position to be in the room when they may not be in the room, and am I being a good sponsor for them? So to me, it's a difference between passive and active.
Absolutely. So yeah, it's all about moving to action. That's the space where we want folks. Because if we recognize that we have challenges, it's some folks do this and they're like, yeah, the challenges are over there, but I'm not even looking at that because I'm not going to do anything about that. But once you engage with it, the thing that I say all the time is that once you witness it, you can't unsee it. And so then inherently it becomes, what am I going to do about it, right? That's the reality of our collective circumstance. So we've talked about DEI, attracting top talent, talking about defining terms and really understanding what it is we're trying to achieve, who's responsible for executing the work. It's everyone, but ensuring that the emotional labor is not on the people who are most impacted by the work. The question that I have right now is, as you think about helping folks avoid pitfalls. Like none of us are perfect and we're all just the sum of our lived experiences. But what are some of the things that you think about as you think about your own professional DEI journey? What are some of the mistakes or some of the things that you've done that you thought like, maybe I should have done that differently? What comes to mind? Oh, no.
Well, I've learned that one of the best things to do is to always include the individuals and to get ideas and to understand where the cultural and contextual and environmental barriers are.
Yeah.
So nothing about us without us is a term that we use in the space, but nothing about us without us, and making sure the lived experiences and the stories and understanding from a different person's perspective is vital.
I want to underline that. Nothing about us without us is what Amy just said. Yeah.
I think one pitfall I've certainly had and I've seen is awkwardness. A lot of times, if diversity means people that aren't the same as you, and if there's one if everybody in the room maybe has a very similar background and one person and you're the one new person, there might be some awkwardness. I know for myself, I personally try really hard to kind of claim back the awkwardness and make you feel awkward before you get to feel it on your own. And so there's certain ways with that. Like I mentioned earlier, running into the chair at the office, that could have been awkward, but because they were all blind, it was just normal. No one even said anything. And so I've had, plenty of awkward encounters. I walked out here, I'm sitting up here. You're probably, not consciously, but unconsciously thinking, he doesn't look blind. I don't have a cane. I don't have a guide dog. I might just look like another college kid. But if I were to walk out here with a cane, inside your head, it would be a little different. Or on the street, it would be a little different. Plenty of times I've, walked into an office, everybody goes silent, and then I'm like, oh no, where is everyone now? So being curious and sort of confronting the awkwardness. If you're feeling awkward, chances are other people are too, and so maybe just putting it out in the middle and kind of making people, maybe bringing some humor in, or just confronting it.
I made the assumption when I first started with Turn Signal that everyone received information the same way. And it took me a while because I wasn't getting the results that I wanted to figure out that I have to be able to, one, understand what's their communication style. Like, how do they want to show up to this meeting? And now one of our staple interview questions is like, how do you like to communicate? And they share, well, I only like the text message. Okay, I'll meet you where you are, and we'll text. We'll figure it out. And so really it's just, that's been the biggest pitfall, is that everyone learns differently. And so taking into consideration that those styles are not going to always necessarily align with your communication style, but you have to be adaptable and flexible as a leader and as an organization to be able to get everything that you need to get done accomplished.
It's a great plug for neurodiversity, because expanding upon that, people do think and process and learn, communicate and socialize differently. And so we need to make sure that we make room and space for everybody to show up how they are, to work in their best way to communicate. So thank you for saying that.
Mm-hmm.
I think Mike's was really profound on this is, did we ask? Many times we get moving on things and we just forgot to ask. We just overran. It's asking. And sometimes you find a problem, and sometimes the most obvious answer is, well, did we ask? No, we didn't. Maybe the answer was right in front of us. We just didn't ask. Having the respect and the openness to ask. And then also a little bit of grace of many times we can be wrong.
Yeah, that's another one, is not making assumptions. Especially for people with disabilities, you can't just assume because I'm autistic that I'm not able to clearly communicate and articulate and drive programs, so just asking, definitely.
Hearing you say that just impacted me, because I was like, wow, there's so much, we make so much assessments about folks just by looking at them or by engaging with them. We think we know. And I think it's an important reminder that we don't know, right? You only know what you actively experience. And so then back again, how do you continue to have different lived experiences that inform who you are and how you show up? Yeah, thank you for sharing that, Amy. That was, I had a moment there. Yeah, I appreciate that. And so as we think about the pitfalls, then conversely, and I know we're in Minnesota and people in Minnesota do not like to brag on themselves and say like how great they are. So just, I know that happens a lot, but what are some things that you've done that they're pretty proud of?
I'm one of those people. I really don't like to talk about myself, but I'll do it. And so since I'm largely a new entrepreneur and new leader in the formal authority way, if you will, what I'm really excited about is what our future is going to look like. And I know as we build out Turn Signal, I want to ensure that our company is as representative of the communities that we want to serve as possible. And so we just extended an offer to someone in our marketing department. And what was very exciting for me is that I think 95% of the people, yeah, it's a high percentage, but 95% of people that we moved through to first, second, third rounds of interviews were women, because our organization has largely been a boys' club. It was founded by 3 black men, but what is diversity to us? Just being 3 black men, that's not diversity. And so we want to elevate our organization to exactly the standard that we want to hold organizations that work with us to, and the same standards that they're putting on and goals that they're putting on for themselves.
Something I'm proud of. So I'm neurodivergent, and I have children that are neurodivergent, and that's interesting because it's difficult to go places. It's difficult to go to the movies. It's difficult to go out to eat. But something I'm proud of here in Twin Cities is that we worked with the twins, and we built out a sensory room for neurodivergent individuals. So now people and their families can go and participate. And that just gives me chills. I want something like that in my town because, again, there's so much limited and accessibility issues for everything that we design in the world. So I'm very proud of that we did. United Healthcare supported that.
Something that I'm proud of is studying abroad this last spring. So being blind, growing up in Minnesota, St. Paul here my whole life, done a little bit of traveling, but never England, never anywhere outside of North America. And I just plopped myself right into the heart of London and had a job right off the bat, like 2 days after I landed. And so I'm really proud of that because the job I was doing was helping other blind people find work. And I was proud that I had found work in a different country, and I was learning how to navigate that country at the same time as I was working and helping people in the same position I was work there. It's really meaningful because the unemployment rate of blind people in the UK is 65%, and in Minnesota it's 80%. So very valuable to me personally to be able to kind of give back to the community. I've been fortunate to be able to hold positions both here and there, and I'm just proud that I was able to do it and help people and kind of see kids often my same age who I remember having a really frustrating workshop where I was working with students who were exactly the same age as me, and I worked for 2 hours on helping them send their very first email. And that was really difficult, but I'm really proud that I got there because sending an email to all of us might not be that big of a deal, but really, really big step for those students in getting out into the working world beyond.
One of the things that I've been most proud of is, and it's been a number of years we've been on this journey, and I call it a movement. And it's intentional to be a movement. Other things might have beginning and middle and an end, and movements don't, they just continue to grow. And ours has been around our disability inclusion, which has been some of the earliest points of advancing our organization from probably affinity groups into employee resource groups to business resource groups. We're on this journey and bringing people together. We recognized I'm a parent of a child with disabilities. That's how we started off, because we were advocating for our children. And then we got to get teamed up with people with disabilities, members of the community. Now we've got the advocates, which we've expanded our horizons to be the caregivers. It's not just parents, it's caregivers, members of the community. We've got professionals that support the community. We have people with a business mandate to actually support the community. They actually serve the disabled community, and we brought them together. And one of our proudest things is our internship program. We were trying to figure out how to hire individuals with disabilities. 80% is the national average for people with disabilities for unemployment. 80%. 4 in 5 don't have a meaningful job. They're meaningful people that can make great contributions. They lack the opportunities. And we had to try and figure out how to create new opportunities. And we went up against a large organization that is institutionally practiced to do things in very few ways. It needs to be one of these or fit like this, or it doesn't fit. And we actually got to go challenge some things. And we got great sponsorship to say, we'll be open to this. And we went out and we found friends. And the friend we found was Inroads, an amazing organization that has deep experience in building internship programs to give people opportunities. And then we were open and vulnerable, and we called them, we said, could you teach us how you did it? And the woman that was there, she said, absolutely, I'll give you everything we have. I said, because I want to apply it to the disability community. You've applied it to people of color, and you've had amazing results. Do you mind if we use what you have? And she said, absolutely. We're coming up on 100 interns with almost 70% conversion to full-time positions. We would never have been able to do that if we didn't challenge our own thinking and our structures, and if we didn't reach out to people who have experience and adopt their method and then just apply it in a little bit of a different way.
Absolutely. And so what I asked you all that question because I think it's also important to model behavior, right? And so it's important for us, back to the point that we started with originally, about talking and about having conversations. The other thing is that when you're doing DEI work in your institutions and organizations and businesses, it's really important that you're talking about it internally, but also you have to talk about it externally too, because people have to know what it is you're doing. And one of the pitfalls of talking about it externally that I hear from clients all the time is like, how do we talk about it without sounding self-serving? Do you all have any advice for how folks tell their story without feeling like they're just serving themselves?
I'll take a stab at that one since no one wants to go. You know, when I think about diversity, equity, and inclusion, one of the common characteristics I think of is that it's unselfish, and it needs to be unselfish. And what I mean by that is a lot of organizations want their organizations to look diverse overnight. But what it takes for you to go into the elementary school, and you have to go into that situation knowing that that person might not come work for my organization, but we're raising up all of the kids at the same time. And so if all organizations go into it with an unselfish lens, we're gonna get results. It might be 5, 10, 15 years down the line, but you have to be okay with that. And so I challenge every person and organization and leader and all the people in this room, when you want to increase diversity within your organization, don't do it from a self-serving perspective. Do it to raise up that child. And I always love this analogy that it does take a village to raise a child, but it also sometimes takes that same child to raise up the village. And we have so many children out there that are just waiting for their opportunity to be elevated.
Absolutely. You look like you were going to say something, Adam. No?
I think about this, and Amy and I have a wonderful colleague, and we get to celebrate his accomplishments. He left our organization. I was very sorry to see him go. He's an amazing, accomplished person and a leader in his field. And he went off to go and take on a larger leadership role, and we got to celebrate him. But we're still connected. We're certainly still friends. We still do things together. It's the community that you build beyond your organization, because it's amazing how it's a really big but a really small world. And celebrating the little milestones, recognizing also the pitfalls that we experience, but celebrating these individuals and the breakthroughs that we make, it's really just kind of supporting everybody.
Sharing stories, because your employees are going to share, whether you know it or like it or not. So employees are already sharing, but elevate those stories, share those stories. That can be less performative based and more just from the people.
Absolutely.
I know for me, I struggle with this too. How do I tell my story without sounding self-serving? And I think as often as I can, I try and start with the metaphor of in the disability community, there's often this notion of, I call it helpless or hero. Like one day I might be crossing a street and someone thinks I need help and grabs my cane and drags me across. And the next day I might get across and there's a crowd of people clapping. And both instances, I'm just crossing the street. And so I think starting small on things like that, like what do we have in common? Often people need to cross streets or go to Walgreens to get their prescription, whatever it is. And I think finding common ground like that and talking about how that doesn't make me a hero and that also doesn't make me helpless. Like I don't, where's the middle ground? What do we all share in common? And I think that helps you stay not self-serving because we all can relate to that, and it kind of puts us on level ground.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well said, Louie. So as I sit here, I'm going to tell you what my takeaways from this conversation have been. And I want to ask you, after I give my takeaways, to tell me if there are other things that you would add to this list. So when you're working to design your DEI culture to attract top talent, define the terms, create a shared language, be a sponsor, it's active, explore your benefits. What are you giving to employees, right? And how can you make those better? Be honest, talk about it. And when you're having these conversations, listen. Always ask yourself, who's at the table? And the other question is, did we ask? What'd I leave out? What would you add to this?
Be curious.
Be curious.
Be open.
Recognize fear and be courageous.
Don't assume.
I'm going to give these to Mychal so he can share them out, but I'm really going to give them out. Okay. Don't assume. Anything else? Okay. I love crowdsourcing lists. I told you solution-oriented, so here we go right here. You're going to get these. My last question for you all is, as you think about the time that you've spent on the panel today and the choice to participate on this panel to talk about attracting top talent based on your DEI practices, what are you inspired to do in your own organizations when you leave this conversation?
To have more conversations. That is truly, I've just thought about 10 more people I need to connect with and more things that I need to educate myself on and really learn. That's my takeaway.
I think we have an opportunity to bring in more people from that have disabilities into our product and have more of a human-centered design around turn signal and what we're offering. So I think I can definitely take away, that's what I've taken away from this conversation.
I take away that I am going to ask more. I think sometimes if I am the only blind person in the room, I may get caught up with everybody asking me how they can help. And sometimes I think I miss, how can I help you? It's a give and take. And so meeting people where they're at, that's been a theme. Asking, finding honesty, and where can I kind of come back and give back to the people who are asking me those questions.
I think about checking kind of my assumptions, biases, and lenses. What lens do I have in play? And am I checking myself first so that I can be a good participant, sponsor, supporter, and actively engaged?
Absolutely. I want to thank you all for your time, both on the panel and in the audience and virtually, because time is our most precious resource. And thank you so much for spending time with us today. Please take these takeaways. Please be a part of the solution. That's what we ask. Just be a part of the solution, big or small. Thank you so much.